Anastasia, the Ringing Cedars series, Book 8, The New Civilization. Read to you by Nicole. Chapter 1, Pre-Dawn Feelings. Anastasia was still asleep, and over the endless Siberian taiga the first glow of light was breaking across the pre-dawn sky. This time I was the first to waken, but stayed quietly lying beside her on my sleeping bag, admiring her serene and beautiful face and the flowing contours of her figure, as the soft, heavenly light of the advancing morning made them ever more distinct. It was good that this time she had arranged for us to spend the night under the open sky. She had no doubt been able to sense the warmth and gentle stillness of the approaching night, and so had made our bed not in her cozy dugout cave, but outdoors, at its entrance. She had spread out my sleeping bag, which I had brought during a previous visit to the taiga, while she fixed up beside me a beautiful place to sleep for herself, comprised of flowers and dried grasses. She looked picture-perfect lying there on that taiga bed, wearing a thin, flaxen, knee-length dress, which I had brought her as a gift from my readers. Perhaps she put it on only when I was around. She was quite capable of sleeping in the nude. The colder it was in the forest, the more dried grasses were applied. After all, a haystack can keep out the cold in the winter, too. Even a simple soul without Anastasia's level of hardness could sleep comfortably in hay without extra clothing. I tried it myself, but this time I was lying there on my sleeping bag, looking at Anastasia resting beside me, and I kept imagining how this whole scene might look in a widescreen feature film. A sylvan glade in the depths of the endless Siberian taiga, the pre-dawn stillness is only rarely broken by a scarcely audible rustling of branches in the crowns of the majestic cedars. And here is this beautiful woman so serenely asleep on her bed of grasses and flowers. Her breathing is perfectly even and barely audible. The only thing noticeable is the slight swaying to and fro of a blade of grass clinging to her upper lip as she inhales and exhales the health-giving air of the Siberian taiga. Never before had I managed to see Anastasia sleep here. She was always the first to awake, but this time I took great delight in watching her. Carefully raising my upper body and resting on my elbow, I studied her face, immersed myself in thought, and began talking to myself. You are still altogether beautiful, Anastasia. It will soon be 10 years that we have known each other. Of course, I've got older during this time, while you have hardly changed at all. No wrinkles on your face, only your golden hair is now showing one strand of silver gray. Apparently, something extraordinary has happened to you. Judging by the massive campaign that's been unleashed against you and your ideas, judging by what is being said in the press and bureaucrats' offices, something is going on in the Dark Forces' camp. They keep trying to get on my nerves, and I know how they'd love to get their hands on you, but their arms are evidently not long enough. And still you've got that gray strand of hair showing. But it can't spoil your extraordinary beauty. You know, tinting individual strands a variety of colors is an in thing right now. Among our young people today, highlighting strands is a hip fashion statement. And you don't even need to go to the hairdressers. It's just happened all on its own. And the scar where that bullet grazed you, it's practically gone. The pre-dawn sky continued to brighten, and the scar was barely noticeable, even up close. Soon it would disappear completely. Look at you sleeping so peacefully here in the fresh air, in your own taiga world, while out there in our world, extremely significant events are taking place. Researchers are talking about an information revolution. Perhaps it is thanks to you, or perhaps they are simply following the dictates of their own hearts, but people in our technocratic world are beginning to create their own family domains, enriching the land. They have adopted your image wholeheartedly, Anastasia, the marvelous image of the future for their family, the country, and possibly the whole order of the universe. They have understood all you have said and are building this marvelous future for themselves. And I am trying to comprehend, too. I'm trying my best. I still don't completely understand what you mean to me. You taught me to write books. You bore me a son. You made me famous. You brought back my daughter's respect for me. You've done a lot, but that's not the main point. It's in something else, the main point. Perhaps it's lying hidden somewhere within. You know, Anastasia, I have never spoken of my feelings for you, neither to you nor even to myself. In fact, I've never told any woman in my whole life that I love her. I've never said that not because I'm completely without feelings, but because these words have always seemed strange to me, even nonsensical. After all, if a person loves another, this love should be reflected in one's actions towards one's beloved. If words need to be spoken, that means there are no genuine, tangible actions. It's the actions, after all, not words, that are most important. Anastasia stirred ever so slightly, took a deep breath, but did not waken, and I continued to talk with her, still speaking within myself. Not once have I ever spoken to you about love, Anastasia, but if you asked me to fetch you a star from the sky, I would climb up to the top of the tallest tree, and pushing off from the uppermost branch, I would take a leap in the direction of that star. If I happened to fall, I would catch myself on its branches and climb up once more to the top and again leap toward the star. You've never asked me to fetch you a star from the sky. You only asked me to write books, and I am writing them. But my writing doesn't always come out too well. Sometimes I fall. But I'm not done with them yet, after all. I still haven't written my final book. I'll try to write it so you'll like it. Anastasia's eyelashes fluttered. A gentle glow flushed across her cheeks, and she opened her eyes. I caught the tender gaze of her bluish, grayish-blue eyes. Oh, Lord, what a warmth those eyes always give off, especially when they're so close to me. Anastasia watched me without a word, but her eyes sparkled as though full of moisture. "Good morning, Anastasia," I said. "You probably haven't had a good long sleep like that before. You've always woken up before me." "And a good morning to you, and a marvelous day, Vladimir," Anastasia responded quietly, almost in a whisper. "I should like to have just a wee bit more sleep." "So you haven't had enough sleep yet?" "I have, and a very good sleep at that, but my dream. I was having such a pleasant pre-dawn dream." "What kind of dream? What was it about?" "I dreamt you were talking with me, about a tall tree and a star, about falling down and climbing up again. The words were about the tree and the star, but it struck me as though they were really about love." "Things can often seem pretty fuzzy in dreams. What connection could a tree possibly have with love?" "Everything can have a connection, and great meaning, too. It is the feelings that matter here, not the words. This day's dawn has brought me an extraordinary feeling. I shall go out to greet and embrace—" "Who?" "This marvelous day which has offered to me such an extraordinary gift." Anastasia slowly rose to her feet, stepped a few paces away from the cave entrance, and then she did something she always did in the mornings, her unique exercise routine. There she was, flinging her arms out to the sides and a little bit upward. She gave a momentary glance up at the sky, and then all at once spun round. Then she ran off and did an incredible somersault before spinning around again. Lying on my sleeping bag by the cave entrance, I admired Anastasia's darts and lunges and thought, wow, a mature woman already, and look how quickly, beautifully, and energetically she moves, just like a young gymnast. Fascinating how she felt what I had in my mind as I was talking to myself while she was sleeping. Maybe I really should own up to her. And I cried out, "Anastasia, it wasn't simply a dream you were having." She stopped her exercise routine at once and stood there in the middle of the glade. Then she deftly turned a couple of cartwheels in my direction and landed right beside me. She quickly sat down on the ground and joyfully inquired, "Not a simple dream? Not simply a dream? And just how is it not simple? Out with it. Tell me all the details." "Well, you see, I was thinking about that same tree. I was talking to myself about a star. And tell me, where did you get these words from? What produced them, these words? Maybe feelings? Our conversation was interrupted by a cry from Anastasia's grandfather. Anastasia, Anastasia, listen to me right away. Do you read me? Anastasia jumped up, and I quickly got up too. Chapter 2. Dominion over Radiation. Has Volodya been up to something unusual again? Anastasia inquired of her grandfather, who had rushed over to us. And grandfather, with a passing glance at me and a brief "Hello, Vladimir," explained, "He is down by the lake shore. He dived down and brought up a stone from the bottom. Now he's standing there clutching it in his hand. It is safe to assume that the stone is burning his hand, but he will not let it go, and I do not know what advice to give him." Then grandfather turned to me and barked, "Your son's down there. You're his father. What are you standing here for?" Not fully aware of what was going on, I ran down to the lake. Grandfather ran alongside me and explained, "This stone is radioactive. It isn't big, but contains a good deal of energy, an energy similar to radiation." "How did it happen to turn up at the bottom of the lake?" "It's been lying there a long time. My father even knew about that stone. But nobody's been able to dive down to it." "How did Volodya manage it? How did he know about it?" "I trained him to do deep water dives." "What for?" "He kept pestering to show me to show him, asking me again and again. 'You two don't seem to have the time to look after your own child's upbringing. You've been shoving the whole burden onto the shoulders of your elders.'" "And who told him about the stone?" "Now who would have told him, apart from me? I told him." "What for?" "He wanted to know what stopped the lake from freezing over in winter." As we approached the lake, I saw my son standing on the shore. His hair and shirt were all wet, but the water had already dripped off them, which told me he had been standing like that for some time. Volodya, with his arms stretched out in front of him, his fingers clenched into a fist which he kept his eyes fixed on like a hawk. It was clear his hand was clutching that same sinister stone from the bottom of the lake. I took 2 steps in his direction, and he quickly turned his head toward me and said, "Don't come any closer, Papa." And when I stopped, he added, "Good health to your thoughts, Papa, but keep back just a little further. Maybe it would be better if you and Grandfather lay down on the ground. I shall be able to better concentrate that way." Grandfather at once lay down on the ground, and without really knowing why, I followed suit. For some time we didn't say a word, just watching Volodya standing on the shore. Then a rather simple thought struck me, and I said, "Volodya, couldn't you just toss it a little ways away?" "Where away?" my son asked, not turning his head. "Into the grass." "I must not throw it into the grass. It could cause a lot of destruction. I feel I must not throw it away yet." "So does that mean you're going to keep standing there all day or 2 days? What next? You're going to stand there a whole week, a month, even?" "I am thinking about what to do, Papa. Let us keep quiet and give thought a chance to find the solution without being distracted." Grandfather and I lay silently on the grass and looked at Volodya, and all at once I became aware of Anastasia approaching slowly, too slowly under the circumstances, from the other end of the shore. When she got about 5 meters from Volodya's position, she sat down at the water's edge, as if nothing unusual were going on. She let her feet dangle in the water and stayed there that way for some time. Eventually she turned to our son and very calmly inquired, "Is it burning your hand, son?" "Yes, Mamma," Volodya replied. "What were you thinking about when you fetched the stone? And what are you thinking about now?" "The stone is giving off energy similar to radiation. Grandfather was telling me about it. But man also gives off energy, I know that, and human energy is always stronger than any other. It cannot be dominated by any other. I brought up the stone, and I am holding it. I am trying with all my might to repress its energy, to send it back inside the stone. I want to demonstrate that man has dominion over any radiation." And are you succeeding in demonstrating the superiority of the energy coming from yourself? Yes, Mama, I am succeeding. Only it is becoming increasingly hotter. It is burning my fingers and palm just a little. Why do you not throw it away? I feel that I must not do that. Why? I feel it. Why? It will explode, Mama. It will explode just as soon as I open my hand. There will be a big explosion. You are correct. It will explode. The stone is giving off the energy accumulated inside it. You used your own energy to repress its flow and direct it back inside. You used your thought to shape the nucleus within the stone. And your energy is now building up inside it along with its own. It cannot go on accumulating indefinitely. It is already raging within the nucleus you formed with your own thoughts. It is getting hotter, and the stone is burning your hand. I realize that, and that is why I am not letting go of my hold. Outwardly, Anastasia was the picture of calm. Her movements were slow and smooth. Her speech was measured and with pauses. I could still feel, however, the extremely intense concentration of her thought. It must have been working faster than ever. She rose to her feet, gave what appeared to be a lethargic stretch, and said quietly, "That means you realize, Volodya, that if you open your hand suddenly, there could be an explosion." "Yes, Mama. That means you have to release it gradually." "How?" "Just a tiny bit at first. First, ease up on your thumb and index finger to expose just a fraction of the stone. Picture it in your mind right off how the energy you directed into the stone is emanating straight upward like a ray, and its own energy will begin to follow suit. Be careful, the ray must be directed only straight up." Concentrating all his attention on his tightly clenched fist, Volodya gradually eased the pressure on his thumb and index finger. It was a sunny morning, but even in broad daylight one could see the ray emanating from the stone. A bird flying way up high fell into the ray and was immediately transformed into a puff of smoke. It looked as though a small cloud exploded in vapor when the ray passed through it. A few minutes later, and the ray was scarcely noticeable. "Oh, I have been sitting here with you too long," said Anastasia. "I think I may go and make us some breakfast while you amuse yourselves here." She took her time leaving. After going only a few steps, she staggered a bit and then headed down to the water and washed her face. No doubt her outward calm had concealed an incredible inner tension. She had hid it so as not to frighten her son and interfere with his actions. "How did you know exactly what I should do?" Volodya called out after the receding figure of Anastasia. "How indeed?" Grandfather echoed mockingly. He had already got up from the ground and was feeling in much better spirits. "What do you mean, how? At school your mamma was a top-notch pupil in physics." And he burst out in a loud guffaw. Anastasia turned to us and broke out into laughter, herself explaining, "I had not known about that before, son, but whatever happens, you always need to look for and find a solution, and not to let your thought be fettered by fear." When the ray could no longer be seen at all, Volodya opened his hand completely. A small oblong stone was lying quietly on his palm. He stared at it for some time, muttering under his breath as he addressed the stone, "What is inside you is no match for man." And then he once again closed his hand into a fist and dived straight into the water without taking off his shirt. It was good 3 minutes before he resurfaced and headed back toward the shore. "I was the one who taught him how to hold his breath that long," Grandfather commented. After Volodya came out of the water, he jumped up and down to dry himself off, then headed over our way. I couldn't wait, but burst out, "Do you have any idea what radiation is, son?" "I guess you don't. If you did, you wouldn't have gone and fetched that wretched stone. Can't you find yourself some other business to poke your nose into?" "I know all about radiation, Papa. Grandfather told me about the disasters that have happened at your nuclear power plants, about your atomic weapons and the dangers now posed by the storage of nuclear waste." "So what's all the interest in this stone lying at the bottom of the lake? What about it?" "Yes, indeed, what about it?" Grandfather joined the conversation. You preach at him, Vladimir. I'm going to have a little rest. It seems that lately your son's been making quite a few demands on me. Grandfather started heading off, leaving me alone with my son. And here he was, standing in front of me in his shirt, all dripping wet. He was evidently quite upset about the worry he had caused us all. I didn't feel like nagging him any further. I simply stood there without saying a word, not knowing how to begin. Volodya was the first to speak. You see, Papa, Grandfather told me that these nuclear waste facilities are extremely dangerous. According to probability theory, they can do irreparable harm to many countries and the people living in them, and to our whole planet besides. They can, of course, but what's this got to do with you? What this means is, if people think the problem is solved, but the danger still remains, it means they have not come up with the correct solution. So, what if it is incorrect? What does it matter? Grandfather said that it is up to me to find the correct solution. So, have you found it? I have now, Papa. There he was, standing before me, my 9-year-old son, soaking wet and with an injured hand, but entirely confident in himself, and speaking in a calm and confident tone of voice about how to solve the problem of storing nuclear waste, an altogether peculiar situation. After all, he is no scientist, no nuclear physicist, and doesn't even study in a regular school. Most peculiar. Here is this boy standing in his wet clothing on the shore of the Taiga Lake and discussing the safest storage of nuclear waste. Not counting on any kind of effective solution on his part, I asked, simply in the interest of keeping the conversation going. Well, what specific conclusions have you come to regarding this insoluble problem? Out of all the possible variants, I think the most effective is deconcentration. I'm not sure what you mean. Deconcentration of what? Of nuclear waste, Papa. How so? I came to the realization, Papa, that radiation in small doses is not at all dangerous. It is present in small quantities everywhere. In us, in plants, in the water, and in the clouds. But the real danger comes when too much is concentrated in one place. In the nuclear facilities Grandfather was telling me about, a whole lot of radioactive objects are concentrated together in one place. Well, everybody knows that. Radioactive waste is hauled to specially constructed storage facilities which are carefully protected from terrorists. They've got specially trained personnel who ensure there are no violations of proper storage technology. Quite right, Papa. But the danger still exists, and catastrophe is inevitable, caused by someone's specific thought imposing a wrong decision on people. You know this problem, son, is being investigated by scientific institutes by highly qualified specialists. You're not a scholar, you haven't studied science, and so you're not capable of solving such an important question. It's modern science that ought to come up with an answer. But what has been the result, Papa? After all, it is precisely the inventions of modern science that have caused people to be subjected to great danger. Of course, I do not study at school, and I do not know the science you are talking about, but he fell silent and lowered his head. What does that butt of yours mean? Why do you stop, Volodya? I have no desire, Papa, to be a pupil in that school or to study the science you have in mind. Why not? Because, Papa, that kind of science is what leads to disasters. But there's no other kind of science. There is. Reality should be determined only through one's own self, says Mama Anastasia. I understand what that means, and I am studying, or determining, at the moment. I do not know how to put it more specifically. Wow, he's sure? How sure he is of his convictions, I thought. Then I asked, and what is the probability of disaster as you see it? 100%. You're certain of that? According to probability theory and the absence of any counteraction to destructive thought, a disaster is inevitable. The construction of large nuclear storage facilities can be compared to the construction of huge bombs. And I am to guess that your thought has begun counteracting this destructive element. Yes, I have launched my thought into space, and it will triumph. Specifically, what solution has your thought come up with regarding the problem of the safe storage of nuclear waste? All nuclear waste, concentrated in large facilities, needs to be deconcentrated. That is my thought. Deconcentration, does that mean dividing it into fragments 100,000th or multi-millionth in size? That is right, Papa. A simple solution. But the big question remains, where to store these tiny fragments? On kin domains, Papa. For a moment, the shock of this incredible statement completely overwhelmed me. I didn't know what to say. Then I practically shouted, "Nonsense! That is utter nonsense you've thought up, Volodya." After I'd thought about it a little more, I said in a calmer voice, "Of course, if nuclear fragments are deconcentrated and spread among various places, a global catastrophe can be averted. But this will also put millions of families who have decided to live on these domains in danger. After all, everybody wants to live in a place that is environmentally clean." "Yes, Papa, everybody wants to live in an environmentally clean place, but there are hardly any such places remaining on the earth today. And here in the taiga, isn't this environmentally clean either? The environment here is relatively clean, but it is not ideal, not pristine. There are no ideal spots left, anywhere. Clouds can bring their acid rain here, too, from a variety of places. The grass and trees and bushes are coping with it for the time being, but the filthy places are becoming only filthier with each passing day, and the number of such places keep growing with each passing day. That is why it is essential right now not to walk away from this filthiness, but attract it. We need to create clean places ourselves. That is what Mama says. From all the possible variants, my thoughts selected just one. It could not come up with any other. My thought tells me it is safer to deconcentrate and tame the waste of one fragment at a time, and derive a benefit for life on our planet by storing a tiny fragment on one's domain. But where on the domain? In a larder? In a safe? Store this radioactive capsule in an underground cellar? Has your thought given any hint of this yet? This capsule should be buried underground no less than 9 meters deep. I spent some time thinking about my son's proposal, which had indeed seemed incredible at first, but the more I thought about it, the more inclined I became to accept that there was some grain of reason in what he said. At the very least, his proposal for nuclear waste storage would be entirely sufficient to avert a large-scale catastrophe. As to pollution on the given domain, that was something that could indeed be avoided, and there might even be a plus side. Perhaps scientists could come up with something like a mini reactor or something similar. And then, all at once, a thought dawned on me. Wow, here was another reason for the need to deconcentrate the storage of radioactive waste. Money. Huge sums are being doled out by foreign governments for the storage of such waste. It is these funds that pay for constructing the facilities, maintaining service personnel, and whole security control systems. And a part of this money inevitably disappears into the unknown. Why not pay it instead to every domain where radioactive waste capsules are stored? Fantastic. Not only would safe contamination be guaranteed, but people would earn money besides. At the present time, nobody can guarantee security from contamination, even for those living far away from the storage facilities. Think what happened at Chernobyl. The contamination affected not just parts of Ukraine territory, but of Russia and Belarus as well. Clouds can carry the pollution for hundreds and even thousands of kilometers. So even though it is still at the conceptual stage and the details need fleshing out, my son's proposal deserves serious consideration, not just on the part of the academic world, but from governments and especially the public. I was walking along the lakeshore, immersed in my thoughts, and had quite forgot about my son. He was still standing at the same spot, silently watching me. His upbringing forbade him from being the first to reinitiate our conversation. To interrupt the thought of a man in contemplation was unthinkable. I decided to change the subject. "So, you spend your time thinking about different problems, Volodya? Don't you have any duties to carry out? Have you been assigned any work to perform?" "Work? Assigned? I always do what I feel like doing. Work? What do you mean by the word work, Papa? Well, work is when you carry out some kind of task, and people pay you money for it, or when you do something that's going to benefit your whole family. Take me, for example. When I was your age, my parents assigned me to look after our bunny rabbits, and that's what I did. I would collect grass for them, feed them, clean their cages, and the rabbits brought our family a bit of income. After hearing me out, Volodya suddenly said with some excitement, Papa, I shall tell you about one particular duty which I assigned to myself. A very enjoyable duty. Only you have to judge whether it can be called work or not. Tell me about it. Then let's go. I have a specific place I want to show you. Chapter 3. Goosey Goosey Ga Ga Ga, or the super knowledge we are losing. We started heading off from the lake, Volodya leading the way. He had changed somehow. His analytical and concentrated mood had given way to one of joyfulness and excitement. Sometimes he would do a pirouette as he walked along, or a little leap into the air as he explained to me. I never looked after bunny rabbits, Papa. I did something else. I'm not sure what to call it. Gave birth? That will not do. Created? Not really. Now I remember. I think in your civilization it is called sitting on eggs. So I sat on some eggs. What do you mean you sat on some eggs? That's a mother hen's job, or some other kind of birds. Yes, I know, but in my case, I had to sit on them myself. What for? Tell me everything in the proper order. All right, in the proper order. Well, it happened in this order. I asked Grandfather to find me some eggs laid by wild ducks and wild geese. At first, Grandfather grumbled a bit, but 3 days later he brought me 4 large goose eggs along with 5 duck eggs, which were smaller. Next in order, I dug a little hole in the ground and put some deer manure at the bottom along with grass stalks, and then I covered them over with dried grass. And then, on top of this, I placed the 2 sets of eggs Grandfather had brought me. What was the manure for? For warmth. Eggs need warmth to hatch, and they need warmth from above, too. Sometimes I lay down on the ground myself, covering the hole with my stomach. When it was cold or rainy, I assigned this task to the bear. How did the bear keep from crushing the eggs? You see, even though the bear is big, the hole containing the eggs is pretty small. He lay on top of the hole, and the eggs were at the bottom. Sometimes I would have the she-wolf guard the eggs. At other times, I would sleep on the ground nearby myself until they started to hatch. It was so wonderful to watch them hatching. Not all of them made it, though. From the 9 eggs I started with were born 2 goslings and 3 ducklings. I fed them grass seeds and crushed nuts, and gave them water to drink. Whenever I fed them, I would invite various creatures living on our territory to watch. What for? To show them how I cared for the little chicks, to help them understand that they should not touch them, but that they should protect them instead. I would also sleep beside the hole where the goslings and ducklings were born, except on cold, rainy nights when I had the bear take over for me. The chicks nested on his warm coat, which made it very nice for them. Next, if I am to proceed in the proper order, I put up stakes around the hole, with which I made a wicker fence from the branches, and put branches above the nests as well. As the goslings and ducklings grew and learned to climb out of their hole, I would walk around their nests and make short whistling sounds. Tss, tss, tss. Upon hearing this, they would immediately climb out and run after me. They tried running after the bear, but I trained them out of it. The bear can travel quite a distance, and the birds might not make it in one piece. But nothing happened to them. They grew up, feathers appeared, and they learned to fly. I would toss them up in the air to help them along. Then they began flying off on their own, but always returned to their nest. When autumn came and a whole lot of birds started gathering in flocks to fly south, my grown-up ducks attached themselves to a whole flock of ducks, and my geese joined a flock of geese, and they all flew off to warmer climes. But I guessed, I was almost certain, that they would return in the spring. And they did. Oh, how fantastic that was, Papa. They came back, and I heard their delightful cry, "Ga, ga, ga." I ran over to the nest and began calling, "Tsu, tsu, tsu." I fed them grass seed and some nut kernels which I had ground up beforehand. They took the feed right out of my hands. I was so happy, and all the creatures around heard the cry and came running, oh, so happily. "Look, Papa, here we are, look!" There, in a secluded spot between two currant bushes, I saw the nest my son had fashioned, but there was no wild life to be seen anywhere around. "You say they've come back, but there aren't any birds here." "Not at the moment. They have flown off somewhere to have a stroll or look for food. That's why they are not here right now. But look, Papa." As Volodya pushed the branches aside to widen the opening, I caught a glimpse of 3 nest holes. In one of them lay 5 small-sized eggs, probably duck eggs. In the other, just one, slightly larger, a goose egg. Wow! That means they have come back, and they're laying eggs. Only just a few. "Yes," Volodya exclaimed in excitement. "They have come back and are laying eggs. They could lay more if I took some of the eggs out of the nest and fed the mothers more often." I looked at my son's happy face, but could not fully comprehend the reason for his joyful excitement. I asked him, "What are you so fantastically happy about, Volodya? I know none of you, either you or your mama or your grandfather, eat eggs, which means that your actions cannot be called work or a job, since there's no practical benefit from it." "You think so? But remember, other people eat birds' eggs. Mama says it is all right to use anything the animals themselves give to man, especially for people who are not accustomed to a vegetarian diet." "What have other people got to do with your activities here?" "I have decided that something needs to be done so that the people living on their domains can be free from the burden of so many household tasks, or almost free, so that they can have time to think and reflect. This is possible if you understand God's intent in creating our world. I find delight in the science of getting to know His thoughts. It is certainly the grandest science of all, and it is something that must be known. We need to learn, for example, why He made the birds fly south in the autumn, but they do not stay in those warmer climes, but come back in the spring. I have thought a lot about this, and have guessed that He did this so that man would not be burdened during the winter time. In winter, birds cannot find food for themselves, and they fly away. But they do not stay in the south, but come back. They want to be useful to man. This is God's intent. There is much for man to learn from what our Creator has conceived." "What you're suggesting, then, Volodya, is that ducks and geese can live in every domain, lay their eggs, feed themselves, and then fly off in the autumn and come back in the spring?" "Yes, quite right. After all, it worked with me." "Yes, I see, it really did work with you, but there's one concern I have. It will probably upset you to hear this, but still, I have to tell you the truth, just so you don't go looking ridiculous with your proposal." "Tell me the truth, Papa." "You see, there's this science we call economics. Economists are trying to figure out what is the best way of handling the production of various goods. In this case, eggs. In our world, a lot of chicken farms have been set up where a whole bunch of chickens are kept in one place. They lay their eggs and can go to these stores and afterward these eggs are shipped off to grocery stores. People can go to these stores and easily purchase as many eggs as they need. It's all worked out to ensure the least expenditure of labor and time on a per-unit basis." "What does expenditure of labor mean, Papa?" "It refers to the quantity of time and resources spent on the production of a single egg. You have to carefully work out what's going to be the most efficient method of production, and that will be the best method." "Fine, I shall try to work it out, Papa." "When you work out the whole thing, you'll understand. But to figure it out, you'll need expense statistics. I'll try to get them from some economist." "But I can calculate everything right now, Papa." Volodya gave a bit of a frown, evidently concentrating, and after a minute announced, -2 to infinity. "What kind of formula is that?" "What does it refer to?" "The efficiency of the divine economy is expressed in an infinite series of numbers. Even starting from zero, modern scientific economics is already 2 points down. You've got a pretty strange method of calculation there. I can't fathom it. Can you explain how you arrived at that figure? I set the benchmark for our current case at 0. All the expenses involved in a chicken factory, its construction, maintenance, and delivery of eggs to stores are summed up in the figure of -1. What do you mean -1? These expenses should be expressed in rubles or kopecks. Monetary units are relative and will always vary, and so they are not significant in this methodology. They need to be lumped together under the arbitrary value of -1, whatever expenses there are in terms of a 0 benchmark. They can be expressed as -1. And where did you get the second minus figure? That is quality. It cannot be very good. The unnatural maintenance conditions and the lack of variety in feed cannot help but lower the quality of the eggs, and this gives rise to another value of -1. So we get -2 altogether. Okay, let's say you're right, but in your case too, there are huge expenditures of time. Here, tell me, Volodya, how much time did you spend, as you put it, sitting on the eggs, and then feeding the ducklings and goslings and watching out for them? 90 days and nights. So 90 times 24 hours, and all that in aid of producing no more than a few dozen eggs. And that only at the end of a year. For people living in their domains, it would be much more efficient to buy some little chicks at the market or hatch them over the winter with the help of an electric incubator. And in 4 or 5 months, they'll start laying. In the second year, before winter sets in, they're generally slaughtered, since their laying capacity goes down by the 3rd year. So they kill them and start raising a new batch. That's technology for you. That is the technology of never-ending burdens, Papa. You have to feed the chicks every day, store up food for the winter, and every other year raise a new batch of chickens. Sure, you feed them and raise new ones, but thanks to modern technology, it isn't nearly as time-consuming as your alternative. But those 90 days will launch a program that will last forever. Once they come back, the migratory birds will raise their young all by themselves. They will teach them how to get along with human beings and come back to their homeland. And they will go on doing this for thousands of years. In launching a program like this, man is passing it on to future generations of his family. He is giving back to them a little paradise of the divine economy. 100 years from now, an expenditure of 90 days in calculating the costs of producing a single egg will count as minutes and continue to diminish with each passing year. But still, there are expenses you haven't taken these into account. These expenses are offset by a powerful counterweight, which is no less significant than what is produced by the birds. What counterweight? When birds once again fly from faraway lands back to their native woods and fields, people are delighted to see them. Thanks to their joyful and beneficial energy, many people's diseases are eliminated. But this energy is 90 times stronger when they do not merely fly back from the south, but come directly to you and start greeting the man living on that domain with their happy cries and refrains of exultation. Their singing brings joy and strength not only to man, but to the whole space around him. Volodya spoke with confidence and inspiration. It would have seemed foolish to continue arguing with him. I pretended to be absorbed in contemplation or to be figuring out something in my mind. I felt a little put out that there was nothing I could teach my son or even offer him a few hints on. And what kind of upbringing or education do we have here anyway? Here is my son standing right in front of me, and yet he seems like a child from another planet or another civilization. He has a different concept of life, a different philosophy, and speed of thought. He can do instantaneous calculations, and it is clear, as I have been made aware, that even if I spent a year on computer calculations, whatever he comes up with would still be more accurate. It is as though everything inside him were turned upside down. Or perhaps it might be more accurate to ask, to what degree have we perverted our own lives, our concepts and meaning of life? All our disasters have arisen from these perversions. No doubt this is all true, but still, I am so anxious to find some way of being useful to my son. But how, with no expectations left? I asked him quietly and offhandedly. "I'll give some thought to those economics of yours. Maybe you're right. But tell me, son, you've been playing with different tasks here, working them out. Have you ever had a really serious problem to meet?" Volodya sighed deeply, and it seemed rather woefully. After a brief pause, he replied, "Yes, Papa, I do have a big problem, and only you can help me solve it." Volodya was sad, while I, on the other hand, was delighted to find something at last where he required my help. "And what does it involve, this big problem of yours?" "A big problem. Remember, Papa, when I told you last time you were here that I was preparing to go off into your world when I grew up?" "Yes, I remember. You said you would come into our world and find yourself a universe girl to make her happy. You'd build a kin's domain with her and raise children together. I remember your telling me. So, you haven't abandoned your project?" "Not at all. And I often think of the future, about that girl and the domain. I can picture in detail how she and I will live there together, and how you and Mama will come and visit and see how the dream which that girl and I co-created together is being turned into reality." "Well then, what's your problem? Are you afraid you might not find your girl?" "That is not the problem. I shall look for this girl and find her. Come, I shall show you another little glade, and you will see it all for yourself. You will sense what the problem is." Volodya and I arrived at a small glade located right next door to Anastasia's. When we reached the middle of the glade, we stopped, and Volodya invited me to sit down on the ground. Then, cupping his hands around his mouth, he gave out a loud and extended cry. "Ah!" First he cried out in one direction, then another, and yet another. In just 2 or 3 minutes there began a rustling in the treetops around the glade, and a whole lot of squirrels could be seen leaping from branch to branch, gathering together on a single cedar tree. Some of them simply sat down on one of the branches and stared in our direction, while others, apparently the more restless ones, continued hopping from one branch to another. A few minutes later, and out of the bushes came running 3 wolves. They sat down at the edge of the glade and also began looking our way. A sable came along and took up a position about 3 meters from the wolves. Then 2 goats appeared. They didn't sit down, but stood at the edge of the glade, their eyes fixed on us. Soon afterward came a deer. The last to arrive was a huge bear, noisily making his way through the bushes. He too sat down at the edge of the glade, panting all the while, saliva dripping from his tongue. He had probably been a long ways off and had to run for some distance. All this time Volodya stood behind my back with his hands on my shoulders. Then he took a few paces back from me and picked some herbs. Coming back to me, he said, "Open your mouth, Papa, and I shall give you some herbs to eat. This is so they can see that I am feeding you from my hand, and will not be upset at the sight of a stranger." I took the proffered herbs in my mouth and began to chew. Volodya sat down beside me, put his head up against my chest, and said, "Stroke my hair, Papa, so that they will fully calm down." I began stroking his light brown hair with delight. Then he sat down beside me and began to explain. "I realized, Papa, that God created the whole world as a cradle for his son, man. The plants, the air, the water, and the clouds, everything has been created for man, and the creatures stand ready to serve man with great delight. But we have forgotten, and now it is important to understand what services the creatures can perform and what their purpose and destiny is. Even today, a lot of people are aware that a dog can guard the house, find lost objects, and aid in keeping one's home safe from intruders. A cat, of course, can catch the mice that raid the larder. A horse is transportation, but all the other creatures have a specific feature and designation too, which should be understood. I have tried the best I could to determine the function of all that you see here. Now they are sitting there and awaiting my command. This is the 3rd year now I have been working with them to understand their purpose. Take, for example, the bear. Because of his big and powerful paws, he can dig an underground cellar, put supplies in it to save for the winter, and dig them up again in the spring. He knows how to bring honey from a tree hollow. Yes, I know, Volodya. Anastasia told me that at one time, people used bears as household help. Mama told me that too. But look what I have taught the bear to do. Volodya rose to his feet and stretched out his right arm in the bear's direction. The bear drew himself up on his haunches and even seemed to stop breathing. When Volodya clapped his hand against his thigh, the huge bear took several giant strides and lay down at the boy's feet. Volodya squatted down beside the beast's enormous head, gave it a slap, and began scratching behind the creature's ear. The bear purred with pleasure. When Volodya got up, the bear did the same, watching the boy's every move. Volodya went over to the edge of the glade where he found a dry branch and stuck it into the ground about 10 meters from where I was sitting. Then he returned to the edge and approached a small cedar tree about 1 meter high. He touched it and clapped his hand twice. Right off, the bear ran over to the cedar and sniffed it. And then an incredible thing started to happen. My son sat down beside me on the grass, and the two of us began watching as the scene unfolded before our eyes. The bear spent some time sniffing the little cedar. First, he would walk away from it, as though measuring something. Then he would run over to the spot where Volodya's dry branch was sticking up. And all around the branch he suddenly began scraping away the earth with his front paws. Working furiously with his paws and their powerful claws, in the space of a few minutes he had dug a hole approximately 80 centimeters in diameter and about half a meter deep. He stopped to admire his handiwork and even stuck his head into the pit, probably to sniff it. After that, the bear ran over to the cedar Volodya had indicated and began to dig out the earth around it. When he had dug what amounted to a circular trench, the bear sat down on his hind paws next to the cedar, dug his front paws into the trench, and pulled the little tree out of the ground, along with a sizable clump of earth. Rising on his hind legs, he held the clump between his front paws and headed over to the hole he had dug earlier. He carefully sat down and lowered the clump with the cedar into the hole. It turned out the hole was about 15 centimeters larger than required. The bear backed off to take a look at his handiwork. Once more he pulled out the cedar and set it to one side while he filled the hole in just a little more before replanting the cedar. Now everything was just right. The bear backed away to once more inspect his accomplishment. This time he was apparently satisfied as he went back to the cedar he had planted and began filling the crevice around the clump from which the tree was growing. He used his paw to scoop up the earth, stuff it into the crevice, and then pack it down around the newly replanted tree. It was quite a fascinating scene, but I had earlier witnessed how squirrels brought dried mushrooms and nuts for Anastasia, or how the wolves played with Anastasia and protected her from wild dogs. Not only that, but a lot of people can observe all sorts of tricks with various animals just by attending a circus performance. My own dog, Cedar, also takes delight in carrying out a range of commands. What I witnessed in the taiga glade also bore outward similarities to a circus performance, except that it didn't take place in an arena surrounded by a high net, but in natural surroundings, and the performers were not circus animals living in confined cages, but free, or wild as we call them, dwellers in the taiga. They might well have seemed wild to us, but to my son they were simply friends and helpers, just like our household pets and farm animals. However, I must point out one mysterious and incredible distinction in particular. The loyalty of household pets and farm animals can be explained by the fact that man gives them food and drink and provides shelter. People who go see animals act at circuses may also notice that after each successful trick, the tamer rewards the lion or tiger, giving them some kind of treat or trifle he keeps on his belt or his pocket, just for that purpose. Circus animals, which spend years in confined cages, have no opportunity to hunt for their own food. They are fully dependent on man. By contrast, the creatures here in the taiga are absolutely free and fully capable of finding food or shelter on their own. Yet still they come. Not just come, but make an enthusiastic dash to respond to man's call and carry out his commands. They carry them out with considerable desire and even servility. Why? What do they get in return? Volodya gave no food to the bear, but still the bear's joy was many times more clearly evident than that shown by the circus animals upon receiving their treat. The bear that transplanted the little tree on Volodya's command stood there, shifting from paw to paw, his eyes fixed on the boy, as though he wanted to repeat the action or perform some other task. It is strange how this huge taiga bear really wants to keep on doing something for man, and for a child at that. Volodya was not about to set the bear any new task. He gestured the bear to come over, grasped the fur on the bear's muzzle with both hands, ruffled it a bit, then petted the muzzle and said, "You are a super helper. Not like the goats." The bear purred with delight. This threatening creature sounded as though it was the very pinnacle of bliss. Anastasia had said, "Such a beneficial energy can flow from man as has never before been seen. Every living creature on the earth needs this energy just as it needs air, sunshine, and water. And even sunlight is but a reflection of the great energy emanating from man. Our sciences have discovered a multitude of diverse energies and even brought about the artificial generation of electrical energy. They have split the atom and manufactured bombs, but how far, in what direction have our sciences advanced in studying the more significant and important question as to the energy emanating from man himself? Is there any tendency towards studying this energy at all, including its mysterious capabilities? Or studying man's abilities in general, his function in both our world and in the universe? Perhaps someone is trying by whatever means available to hinder man from knowing himself. And I mean actually hindering. It cannot possibly be man's destiny to spend years sitting in a casino or at a bar for a shot of vodka or drudging away at a cash register in some store or at a manager's desk in some office. And even a supermodel or a president or a pop star, none of them come even close to man's most important purpose. And yet it is these very professions of our modern age, along with making money, that some enigmatic entity is promoting today as the most important thing in man's life. It is what we see in a good many of our films and TV shows, which concentrate on everything except the meaning of life. All they do is turn man into a banana head. Isn't that the reason wars are happening all over the place, and the earth is becoming more and more polluted? And people lose their sense of direction. They see no purpose in living, and so they take to vodka and drugs. Who is supposed to stop all this rot that is taking place with our earth? Science? But science isn't saying anything. Religion? Which religion? Where are the results? Maybe everyone needs to ponder this for themselves. Ponder it for themselves. To ponder, one must first think. But where? When? Our lives have become one giant bustle from morning till night. Every single attempt that has ever been made to ponder the meaning of life has been suddenly aborted. Selling magazines featuring half-naked, sensuous bodies, oh sure, savoring sexual perversion, oh sure. Showing and telling about the beastly antics of pervert maniacs, oh sure. Writing and talking about prostitutes in the media, oh sure. But there is less and less talk about the meaning of man's life and man's purpose. It's becoming more and more a taboo topic. I glanced up from my contemplations to look at my son. He was sitting on the grass beside me, watching me intently. I thought he might have something more he wanted to show me. I asked him, "And what was it you were saying to the bear about goats, Volodya?" "I cannot, for the life of me, Papa, determine what their purpose is." "What's there to determine? Everyone knows what goats are for, to give milk to man." "Yes, milk, of course, but perhaps there's something more they can be taught. What more could they possibly... Why bother looking for something else? I've been watching them. Goats are capable of stripping bark off trees and stumps. They can bite off branches from bushes. If you let them into a domain, they could cause harm to the plants. To stop that from happening, I am trying to teach them to trim the hedges around the domains." "Trim?" "Yes, Papa, trim. After all, people trim hedges to make them more beautiful, either in a straight line or in different shapes. Grandfather told me you can call it landscape design or topiary art, but the goats do not seem to have any concept of what I want them to do. And how are you teaching them? I shall show you. Volodya reached for a rope made of nettle fibers, woven together, about 3 meters long. He fastened one end to a small tree and stretched the rope through a clump of bushes. Then, gesturing the 2 little goats to approach, he gave each of them a pat. He touched the bushes with his hand and even snapped off a small branch himself with his teeth. He said something to the goats, and they set about vigorously gnawing off the bushy branches. Each time they neared the border, Volodya would give several tugs on the rope and make some disapproving sounds. The goats would stop for a time, holding their snouts up and looking inquiringly at the boy, but then go back to biting off branches, paying no attention to the rope. You see, Papa, it's not working. They do not realize they are supposed to trim the bushes in an even line. Yes, I see. Is that the problem you were talking about? That is not the main problem, Papa. It is something else. Then what? You noticed, Papa, how happily the different creatures came running to my call. Yes, I did. I have been working with them for several years now, and they have become accustomed to communicating with me. But only with me. They look forward to this interchange. They want to be petted. But once I go off into your world, they will miss me. They will miss not having a man ever come to see them again, or call them and give them something to do. I feel that the communication with man and serving man has become the most significant focus in their life. Couldn't they communicate with Anastasia? Mama has her own circle, her own creatures she is friends with. Besides, she is very busy and does not have time for all of them. But, you see, these... And here, once again, Volodya pointed to the creatures still sitting around the edge of the glade. These I chose myself, and I am the only one who has been working with them these past few years. 3 months ago, I asked Grandfather to be present with me at all our training sessions. Grandfather muttered, but he was always there beside me. But recently he told me he would be unable to replace me. Why? He said he did not have the same interests as I had in animal training. And once again he began to mutter that I should not have spent so much time with the animals individually, and that I should not have given them so much petting. And he reminded me that these creatures look upon me not only as their leader but as their child too, since the older among them saw me when I was a baby, and even nursed me. You see, I made some kind of mistake, and now I must definitely correct it. Only now I am no longer able to correct it all on my own. I looked at all of the creatures sitting at the edge of the glade. They gave every indication that they were waiting for Volodya to give them some sort of instructions, or do something with them. I imagined how they would miss him if he were to go away. The same way my dog Cedar misses me when I have to leave my home in the country for days or weeks at a time. She has a warm little doghouse, and I don't keep her chained up. She's free to roam the fields or the forest or the village, and I have a neighbor who feeds her every day. He makes kasha for her and gives her bones to chew on. But my neighbor tells me she misses you, Vladimir Nikolaevich. She'll often sit by the gate and gaze down the road you come home on, and sometimes she'll whimper. And whenever I arrive, Cedar rushes headlong to greet me, rubs against my legs, and sometimes she's so enthusiastic she'll jump right up and try to lick my face, soiling my clothes with her dirty paws. And there's no way I can train her to be not quite so ebullient in expressing her emotions. But these creatures in the glade, with all the time we talked, they sat there quietly watching us, looking the picture of composure. What do they want? After all, nobody is making them sit that way or wait on some kind of command from man. My God. A thought all at once bubbled up with absolute clarity and struck my heart. It was much more than just about these creatures sitting in a taiga glade. It was the realization that all the creatures on earth have a specific purpose and await contact with the highest being on the planet, namely man. They have been created to help man fulfill his supreme mission. Like all life on the planet, they were created by man They were created by God to help man realize his grand destiny. But man... I looked at the creatures in the glade and began to realize that my son did really have a serious problem on his hands. He could not simply abandon these creatures, nor could he bring himself to give up his dream about the girl he would be setting up a domain with. Yes, Volodya, that really is a problem, I told my son. Doesn't look as though there's any solution, not one we can find. There is a solution, Papa, but it does not depend on me. Oh, whom then? You are the only one who can solve this problem, Papa. Me? And just how am I supposed to do that? There's nothing I can do here, son. There is a solution. I think, Papa, that you will be able to help me if you really want to, said Volodya quietly. You think so? But you see, I have no idea what to do. You may think so, but I have no idea. I was still sitting on the grass while Volodya stood in front of me, looking at me in the eye with some kind of imploring gaze, his lips whispering something inaudible. I could tell by his lips that he was saying one particular word over and over again. Then, without taking his eyes away, he said it distinctly. Sister. I earnestly beg of you, Papa, to bear me a sister, together with Mamma. I shall nurse her and raise her myself. They will help me. We shall not distract you and Mamma from your activities. I shall teach her when she grows a little. I shall tell her about everything. She will remain here with my creatures and my space. Bear me a sister, together with Mamma. Unless, of course, you are ill or are too tired. That is, of course, if you can. Grandfather told me that men in your world often get ill and grow older faster because of the way of life there. The air not fit to breathe and the foul water. You are a little past 50 years old, Papa. But if you are tired, Papa, if your strength is pretty much exhausted, then spend 3 days with me, just 3 days. I have everything all prepared, and a great deal of strength will be restored to you. My son was excited, and I interrupted him. Wait, Volodya, calm down. Of course, I'm a little tired, but I think I'll have enough strength. That's not the point. In principle, I have nothing against giving you a sister, but when it comes to bearing children, a desire on part of both parents is required. I am sure of it, Papa. I know for certain that Mamma will not refuse. If you agree, let us not waste any time, but begin right now to prepare for the birth of my sister. I have been studying up on it. Grandfather has helped me a great deal. I have made calculations and have everything prepared. Stay with me 3 days and 3 nights, and do not go off anywhere, and do not get distracted by anything, Papa. Your energy and strength will increase. What makes you think I don't have enough energy or strength, Volodya? I think you have enough, but you shall have more. Okay, I shall spend all 3 days with you alone, but we must go and let Mamma know. I shall explain everything to her myself, Papa. I shall tell her we have a common project. She will not go into specifics and will not object. Well, all right then, let's get started. I began to wonder what my son had prepared that would restore a great deal of strength and energy to man after only 3 days. And I shall say right off that the procedures he prepared may seem rather strange, but the sensation resulting from them on the 3rd day defies explanation in words or writing. It wouldn't be appropriate either to say that man becomes 10 or 20 years younger, though he may indeed look as much as 5 years younger. But on the inside, somehow everything on the inside seemed to be working differently. Not only did I have new strength, but the world around me seemed just a bit different. Chapter 4. Rejuvenation. First ordeal. No sooner had I agreed to follow through with the procedures thought up by my son than he signaled the assembled creatures to go away. He grasped hold of my hand, and we ran down to the lake. Volodya stopped several times along the way to pick herbs in various places, which he softened and rolled into a ball. When the ball was ready, he instructed me to eat it, which I did. And in just a few minutes I noticed a heavy drip of snot exuding from my nose, and I began to vomit. It seemed that all my stomach juices had been pumped out. I was unable to speak for all the vomiting, while Volodya explained, "That is good, Papa. Do not be afraid. It is good for all that useless stuff to come out of you. Only a pure state will remain. This is what they do in cases of poisoning." I was physically unable to offer any kind of answer, but thought to myself, that is true. Poisoning victims drink tablets, which produce nausea and vomiting. There are laxatives, of course, castor oil, for example, but what do I need this ordeal for? I haven't been poisoned. As though he had tuned into my question, Volodya explained, "You, of course, have not been poisoned, Papa, but the food you have been consuming is right on the verge of having poisoning effect. Just let go of everything filthy inside you. After the vomiting and the discharge of the phlegm from your nose, along with the copious flow of tears from my eyes, I began having a series of soft bowel movements, and 5 times I ended up running into the bushes for a lengthy period. The whole procedure lasted 2 to 3 hours. Then came relief. Now, do you feel better, Papa? Better than before, eh?" "Yes," I affirmed. Second ordeal. Volodya once again took hold of my hand, and we ran off. When we reached the shore of the lake, he instructed me to wash myself and swim around a bit. Upon coming out of the water, I noticed him extracting a clay jar from a hole in the ground, about 1.5 liters in size. "Now, Papa, you need to drink this water. It's called dead water, because it contains very few microbes. This water should not be drunk if the air is polluted. But we have pure air here, so it's all right to drink dead water. It will rinse your insides and cleanse them, and wash out a lot of microbes and bacteria from your body. Drink as much as you can, Papa. When you have drunk up this whole jar, I shall give you another, and when you have finished that, I shall give you a 3rd jar containing living water. And all the microbes and bacteria you need will be restored in a balance that is just right for you." I should point out right off that Volodya and his family consider dead water to be that found at great depths below the earth's surface and containing a minimum of bacteria. I believe our mineral water in bottles is precisely what they call dead water. In any case, I think all of our drinking water is dead water, and that is why our children suffer from dysbacteriosis, especially newborns. Living water, on the other hand, they consider to be surface water from pure streams or bodies of water, of which have indeed been preserved in the depths of the Siberian taiga. There's something I wish to emphasize here. Grandfather later explained to me that spring water is not considered living water when you drink it right out of the spring. To be considered living water, it must first be kept for 3 hours or so in a wooden or clay vessel with a wide neck. Living water needs to absorb sunlight, he said. With the aid of sunlight, organisms are generated which are indispensable to human life. You call them microbes and bacteria. Then the water should stand in the shade for at least another 3 hours. After that, it can be drunk as living water. Third ordeal. So take a drink whenever you feel like it, Papa. And in the meantime, we shall proceed to the next phase. Usually, for people polluted by the outside world, this whole process takes about 19 days. Grandfather said, though, it is even better to stretch it out over 33 days. Since you do not have that kind of time, I have shortened it down for you into 3 days, but we shall manage. Come with me to another spot. I have set up a particular device there. We walked about, and 100 meters away from the lake, there, amidst a group of trees, I saw a place prepared for me to lie down, made of dried grasses. Next to this lay 4 ropes made of woven nettle fibers or flax. At one end of each rope there was a noose, while the other was tied to a tree. After I lay down, Volodya put each of my hands and feet through the noose and tugged on them a little and began tightening them with the aid of the sticks placed halfway along each rope. After a little tugging, as though trying to literally quarter my body, he jerked one of my hands and feet in turn. I could feel a crunch in my joints. Then he tightened the rope even more, saying, "Papa, you need to lie like this for an hour on your stomach and an hour on your back. And so that it will not be boring for you and even more beneficial, I shall give you an invigorating massage. And you can just relax, or even go to sleep if you like." My son and I went through this procedure 2 hours each day on all 3 days. As I later found out from Grandfather, this procedure served to lubricate all my joints. It is especially important for elderly people. It can even add to one's height, since it straightens out the spinal column. But the main benefit is increased lubrication of the joints. Think about it. When we walk or run or work out in the gym to pump up our muscles, almost all exercise involves increased pressure on our joints. In Volodya's procedure, though, it is exactly the opposite. The pressure is taken off. Each time during the stretching procedure, Volodya gave me a massage. On the second day, he rubbed my body down with some sort of sweetish juice or tea, and a whole lot of insects crawled over me. I had been told earlier by Anastasia that they serve to cleanse the pores of my skin. In our own living conditions, the pores of the skin can be cleansed by going to a Russian banya and applying, for example, a birch besom. When a man steams and sweats, the pores of his skin are cleansed too. Interspersed with the stretching procedures, we did some fairly common exercises. Running, swimming, chinning ourselves on the bough of a tree, using it as one would an exercise bar. About 3 times a day, Volodya suggested I do a handstand, head down, and hold the position for as long as I possibly could. I stood like that, my legs leaning against a tree trunk. This, too, is rather interesting procedure. A lot of blood rushes to one's face, making it tense up and causing a smoothing of the wrinkles. For the whole 3 days, we lived on cedar milk, flower pollen, cedar nut oil, berries, and a small quantity of dried mushrooms. All of this is available in our society. Going through all the procedures thought up by my son and reflecting on how they could be adapted to our conditions, I came to the general conclusion that all this can be done effectively back at home. One can even use body-cleansing agents available in pharmacies, as well as making use of diuretic remedies and fasting. It is not difficult to obtain dead water either. All water sold in bottles today is dead water. You can get living water too if you have access to a pure wellspring. You begin to feel the healing effects of these procedures right off. A mysterious procedure. But included in this set of procedures was a rather mysterious one, which would be quite a challenge to replicate under our conditions, although maybe someone will have an idea and let me know. I shall describe it in detail. 3 times a day, morning, just before lunch, and just after 3 o'clock, in the afternoon more or less, my son gave me some tea to drink which he had prepared. Each time when the hour came for me to take the tea, Volodya would run off to his hiding place and bring back a small jar of this tea, which he invited me to drink, but no more than 1 swallow at a time. The first time he did this, he said, "Take a drink of this tea, Papa, and remember how big a swallow you took. As soon as you have drunk it, lie down on the grass, and I shall listen to what is happening with your heart." I drank the tea and lay down on the grass. Volodya put his little hand on my chest and kept very still. Within a few moments, I felt either a warming or a tingling sensation in different parts of my body. My heart began to beat furiously. It wasn't as though it had started beating any faster. I had the sensation of my heart muscles expanding normally, but contracting and much more sharply than usual, forcing out the blood. As I was later informed by specialists, in cases of vigorous and sharp blood flow through places where the capillary vessels are partially blocked, warming and tingling sensations can be expected. Volodya listened to my heartbeat for several minutes and then said, "Everything is fine, Papa. Your heart can actually withstand an even larger swallow. But it is best not to take any chances. The next time, take a slightly smaller swallow." When I asked my son why he was giving me this tea and what its composition was, he replied as followed, "This tea, Papa, will give you a great deal of strength and help you recover from any diseases you may have. But most importantly, it will enable you to discover the strength and energy you will need for the birth of my sister." What, do you think I don't have enough already? Perhaps, but now you will have the strength and energy in abundance and in the exact balance you need. Are they permanent, or will I use them up with the birth of the child? For bearing subsequent children, you will need to drink this tea once more. After all, they do it this way each time. And just who might they be? Sables and other animals. I only studied the sable's actions. It was grandfather who advised me as to when and what time and for how many days I needed to watch them in particular. And how does Grandfather know about all that? Grandfather, you see, Papa, has all the knowledge of the great wise priests of yore, even knowledge that has been forgotten by the priests of today, and even knowledge that was secret many thousands of years ago. This tea was taken by the priests before the birth of their children, also before death, so that they could remain immortal. What do you mean before death, so that they could remain immortal? Well, I mean so that everyone would think they were dead, whereas in fact they only changed bodies and were reincarnated on the spot, and all their information stayed with them. There are other methods of quick reincarnation, but very few that will allow the retention of the information possessed at the time of death. This is why people can be reborn but still have to study life all over again, learn everything right from scratch, and they are unable to compare the present world with the past, and they get confused in their life because they include no knowledge of life and no feelings capable of sensing God. But with Grandfather, all the information about the past, you're saying, has been retained? Yes, Papa. Our Grandfather is a great priest and a wise man. There is only one person living on the earth today who significantly surpasses him in power. Where is he living right now, this strongest and wisest one? Do you know? You must be talking about the high priest. I'm talking about our Mama Anastasia, Papa. Anastasia? But how could she have more information and greater knowledge than your great-grandfather? Grandfather says he is hindered by too much information, and he can forget things, but Mama experiences no such hindrance because there is no information contained in her. What do you mean? Which is it? Does she really know more, or has she no knowledge at all? I did not express myself quite accurately, Papa. With Mama Anastasia, all the information, how shall I put it? She has a great deal more, only it is compressed in the form of feelings, and whenever she needs to, she is able to feel into a single moment something that Grandfather might require a day or two or even more to think about. I can't say I understand everything you've said, but it is interesting. Tell me more. What about you? Does this mean that you don't possess information about the past, seeing how you've had to consult with Grandfather? That is correct. Why? You mean to say that you are mentally inferior to them, Grandfather and great-grandfather? And what do they tell you about this? Grandfather probably tells you that I'm to blame. Grandfather never told me anything like that. But what about Mama? What does she say? I asked Mama why I do not know as much as my forebears, and not as much as she or even you, Papa, and this was her answer. All the truths of the universe, son, and all the information accumulated right from its pristine origins has always been available to every man, nothing hidden. Not everybody is capable of understanding it and making it their own, because their life goals and the aspirations of their souls do not correspond to those of the universe. Man has free will in everything, and is free to choose a path other than that of the universe. But God is free too, as to when, how, and to whom he gives a hint. You must not worry about information that is lacking you. Seek out your dream and know that the whole will be offered to you in full, if the dream that is born within you is worthy of co-creation. So tell me, Volodya, what do you make of all that? Once my dream and life goal are created in their detail, all the knowledge I need to turn the dream into a reality will be born in me, all on its own, without fail. But in the meantime, then you will go on consulting with Grandfather? Yes, with Grandfather and Mama and you, and I shall try to ponder life all on my own. Does that mean I have to consult with Grandfather about the recipe for the extraordinary tea you've been giving me these past 3 days? When it comes to the recipe, I can tell you about that myself. Then tell me. This recipe was prepared using taiga herbs, so that I would be able to know which herbs to choose, and in what correlation. For 3 days and nights I observed a sable, one that likewise had an aspiration to be a father. Grandfather told me that the female sable will not allow her mate to approach her if he fails to prepare himself properly. And I observed What herbs he ate during those days, and at what time he chose to pick them, that too turned out to be important. All the herbs he ate I gathered as well, only I had to gather a larger store of them, since you, Papa, I can tell, weigh quite a bit more than a sable. Once I had gathered samples of particular kind of herb, I would put them into a vessel and grind them down with a pestle until a juice emerged. At this time I thought only good and pleasant thoughts about you, Papa, and Mamma, and about my future sister. Then I would take the paste which resulted and empty it into a clay jar. I poured water over the jar's contents and added cedar oil so that it formed a film on top. When you drank that swallow of tea, Father, and your heart started beating a bit faster, I could tell the tea had turned out well. As I listened to my son, I thought, not many people have the opportunity to observe a sable in its natural surroundings. But perhaps they could keep watch on what herbs a cat or dog eats, for example, for that would be necessary to carry or transport these pets into a forest and follow their behavior, and if possible, identify which herbs they ate. I was most interested in the tea recipe, which my son followed, since just 3 days using it produced a palpable effect, while Volodya had indicated a complete therapy course ought to last either 19 or 33 days. That means that after a full-term course, in combination with the other exercises, man can really free himself from many ills, halt his body's aging process, and rejuvenate himself in some sense of the word. I want to stress that even this 3-day application in practice confirms that such an effect is possible. Then there is folk wisdom, too, to take into account, as well as the scientific basis of these procedures. Of course, people have gone to chemists or drugstores and seen herbal mixtures our pharmaceutical industry has to offer for the treatment of a variety of ailments. Many know that in nature there are a whole lot of medicinal plants, but not everyone knows that these can only be really effective, either prophylactically or therapeutically, if they are picked on the right day and at the right time of day. As to preparing herbal mixtures, along with everything else must be considered the way medicinal herbs correlate with each other. As we can see, there are too many factors that need to be known in order to prepare a mixture like Volodya's, and it is highly doubtful whether any of our herbal healers today know about all the factors involved. I very much wanted to take this opportunity of presenting as a gift to my readers a recipe for body restoration never before published anywhere in the world, and in a simpler form than Volodya's, so that it will be easily accessible to the majority of people. Directly, my son's 3-day therapy course came to an end. He informed me he would like to go to bed earlier than was his custom. It turned out that he barely managed to get 2 or 3 hours sleep a night the past 3 nights, and he dozed off immediately, while I started heading back toward Anastasia's glade. I was fascinated by 2 questions. First, why did our son not possess a knowledge of the past as did grandfather? And secondly, was there any way of simplifying the recipe for the tea which he had prepared for me? A vision. Thoughts of food, however, were gradually relegated to the back burner as I began to concentrate more and more on thoughts of my future daughter. On the one hand, it wouldn't be a bad thing at all if Anastasia gave birth to a daughter as well as a son. But on the other hand, when this daughter gets older, she will either have her own space or inherit the space created by my son and face the same problems as Volodya is having to deal with right now. Besides, who could she possibly marry here in the taiga? She could go off into our world, but that wouldn't be easy either. It would mean leaving her own space and her loyal animal friends, and I can't imagine any young man agreeing to come and live with her in the taiga. It's not all that comfortable here in the wilds for someone from the outside. And to be honest about it, that includes me. It's interesting to talk with Anastasia. I would even say her company is alluring. When I'm with her, I feel a sense of peace and joy in my heart. But when I'm left all alone and she is not around, I feel uncomfortable, to say the least, even a bit fearful. The creatures treat Anastasia and our son quite differently from me. Of course, they don't attack me, but whenever we meet, they still regard me with an air of suspicion. I once attempted, in Anastasia's presence, to command the squirrels to bring me some cedar cones. I made the same gestures as Anastasia, but there was no reaction from the squirrels. Another time I tried calling the she-wolf, just like Anastasia. I held out my hand to her, then clapped it against my thigh. But instead of running toward me, she stood rooted to the spot, and her hackles stood on end in a show of aggression. And I lost any desire to further communicate with these creatures. I realized that they could be loyal only to one specific man in perpetuity. So it could turn out that some young man comes to see our daughter in the taiga, and he will not feel comfortable in her space. Volodya has not given sufficient thought to his sister's future. Turns out he feels sorry for the creatures, but apparently not for his sister. And I didn't think about it either. I absent-mindedly gave him encouragement. Immersed in these thoughts, I was surprised to discover that I had already arrived at Anastasia's glade. No sooner had I taken a few steps in the direction of the familiar dugout than I noticed Anastasia herself standing there, her body half turned to me, combing her long hair with her hands. I stopped dead in my tracks. She did not look at all like the same woman I had known for the past 10 years. And when she turned to face me, my legs became jelly, my heart began throbbing, and I realized I could not move from the spot. Just 10 to 15 paces from me stood a woman who looked the picture of a fairy tale vision. She was wearing a long, sheer, light-colored dress down to her ankles, almost like a ball gown, gathered with a belt around her slender waist. Her head was crowned with a wreath woven of grasses and flowers like a diadem. Her golden hair hung in wavelets around her shoulders. But that wasn't all. Her stately figure and face were so beautiful as to defy any possible description. I stood there, afraid to move, my gaze unblinkingly fixed on Anastasia. It seemed as though, if I took my eyes away, I would lose consciousness. My head began spinning, and I continued to gaze at her without blinking. I found myself digging my nails forcefully into my hands, seeking escape from pain of all this extraordinary state of mind. But I hardly felt any pain at all. And as this uniquely beautiful woman gradually and graciously approached me, I lost all sensation, not just of pain, but of any part of my physique. She slowly came right up to me, and I recall feeling the enchanting fragrance of her body. I could sense her light breathing, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground. Anastasia was sitting beside me, massaging my temples and the bridge of my nose. Her diadem wreath was gone, and her hair was brushed back and tied with a blade of grass. I felt an almost complete calm as I gazed into those tender grayish-blue eyes which had become so dear to me. And I finally came to myself upon hearing her voice. "What happened to you, Vladimir? Did you get overtired, or did our son somehow upset you?" "Our son? No, quite to the contrary. He has been giving me treatments these past 3 days. We went through a series of exercises." "And you overexerted yourself?" "Volodya did. He fell asleep. By contrast, I've begun to feel very good indeed." "Then why did you lose consciousness? Your heart was throbbing and has still not completely calmed down." "Because, oh Anastasia, why did you dress up like that? Your hair somehow different, and the way you walked as you approached me, that was unusual too." "I wanted to do something nice for you, Vladimir. After all, you're more accustomed to look at women in fancy clothes. I thought you and I could take a walk together through the taiga or along the lake shore. And here you are lying down. If you want to have a rest, let us go to the dugout, and there you can have a nap." "First, let's go and take a walk as you proposed," I said, and I rose to my feet. "Only you, Anastasia, walk behind me, please." "Why?" Because, yes, I am more accustomed to looking at women in fancy clothes, as you say, but it is better for me if you don't dress up that way, or wear your hair like that, or adorn yourself like that." "You do not like the way I looked, Vladimir?" inquired Anastasia, as she trotted along behind me. "That's not it. I liked it very much, only in future do it just one step at a time. Your hair first, for example, and then spend some time wearing it that way. Then you can put on your diadem wreath, and a day or two later the dress, only without the belt to start with, and afterward you can put on the belt. You see, if you do everything at once, it's really hard for me to get accustomed to. It looks strange. Strange? Does that mean you did not recognize me, Vladimir? I recognized you, but it's just that I was simply overwhelmed with your beauty, Anastasia. Aha, you admit it. You admit it. That means you really think I'm beautiful, eh? I felt her hands resting on my shoulders, and I stopped. Then I closed my eyes, turned around, and replied, You, Anastasia, are not just beautiful, you are... She pressed herself against me, putting her head on my shoulder. Our son, Anastasia, I went on in a whisper, would like to have a little sister. And I would like you and me, Vladimir, to have a daughter, Anastasia quietly responded. May she have your looks, Anastasia, and may our daughter be like you. I shall not describe that night or the following morning. They are beyond description, but I shall say one thing to my men readers. If any of you manage to see a goddess in the woman, you know your days and nights, many, many days and nights, in fact, will be divine. All the mysteries of the past will vanish before them, and there will be no more storms to darken your day. I'm not talking about sentimentality here, nor about beautiful words and professions of love. The whole point is, in any case, let each figure it out for themselves, if they can and wish to do so. Chapter 5. Divine Nutrition. It was only several days later that I remembered I wanted to find out from Anastasia the recipe for the therapeutic tea, as well as the overall method of correct nutrition or dietetics for my readers. It's a good thing I remembered. It seems that Anastasia knew about an unusual, I might say unique, method of nutrition which can be applied even to city living conditions. To my surprise, instead of giving me the tea recipe right off, Anastasia began talking about man's capabilities, about patients and healers. We had spoken of this on several other occasions, but what she had to tell me this time was indeed interesting. Reality, Vladimir, must be defined only through oneself. Every man living on the earth today is capable of seeing into the lives of people thousands of years ago, of looking into the future and creating his own future. All have this tremendous ability within themselves. It just needs to be understood. Once it is understood, then nobody can lead them away from the truth. People will come into harmony with each other, and endless warfare will cease. A lot of efforts have been made to distort past reality. The possibility of distortion arises when man abandons his own reasoning powers and forms constructs of the past based on somebody else's words and conclusions. It is not entirely clear to me, Anastasia, how every man on the earth can arrive at a knowledge of people living in centuries past, let alone past millennia. There is a whole science, too, exclusively devoted to studying the history of mankind. But even today, scholars argue over man's origin and purpose. Historical events are interpreted in different ways. In different ways. Does that mean there are correct and incorrect interpretations? Or perhaps is some distortion in the way they all describe the past? As a rule, the distortions are introduced for someone's particular benefit. But when you, all by yourself, recreate scenes of the past within yourself, you will see the truth. You will determine your purpose and place in the universe. But how, for example, would I be able to see historical scenes of thousands of years ago all on my own? You can picture them through logical thinking, and even the life of the Vedra civilization will appear to you. And what should I think logically about? About images of people you've seen over the half-century of your life, and the changes that have taken place in them. It's still not too clear to me just how I should be thinking. It will become clear if you are not too lazy to think. Come, Vladimir, let us begin together, and you can continue on your own, and every man may recreate scenes of the past in order to integrate the very best parts into his future. All right, then, but you be the first to start. I shall begin. Look hard, and if you can, add details. They are important. Today, you see a whole lot of hospitals and pharmacies with medicines for thousands of ailments. Yes, that's something everyone can see. What of it? Do you recall that just 30 years ago there were fewer of them? Yes, of course. And how many were there 100 or 200 years ago? A lot fewer. Everybody knows that modern medical science is only a little over 200 years old. You see, your own logic has led you to a conclusion. Not too long ago, there were no hospitals at all. Now think and recall who treated people in cases of illness. Who? You yourself lived in a village and saw how your grandmother gave your father and mother herb teas to drink. In that village, it wasn't just my grandmother who could bring about cures, there were others too. And in every human settlement, there were most certainly people who gathered and preserved therapeutic herbs. And every man could obtain help right away, whether he came down with a minor ailment or even a serious disease. And payment for help was a pittance. Often just a simple thank you sufficed. Well, sure, they were neighbors after all, and there were plenty of herbs to be found all around. Yes, there were very many useful herbs, and many people were aware of the properties of these herbs. Yes, of course they were. I myself knew about some of them, but now I've forgotten. You see, you have forgotten. Many people have forgotten. What does a man do today if he gets a scratch or a cut? He goes to the pharmacy, buys a bandage or Band-Aid, and sticks it on the wound. He spends time getting to the pharmacy and spends money when he is there. By contrast, in the past, every child knew that if you apply a plantain leaf directly to a wound, the wound will quickly heal and there will be no infection. I know that too. But today, in many places, the herbs are contaminated. All around you find noxious fumes from cars, dust, acid rain. Yes, you are right. But that is not the point. When we talk about images of the past, you can draw the conclusion that man's knowledge of curing people in the past was superior to that of people today. It would seem that way. I hear a note of doubt or uncertainty in your voice, Vladimir. In that case, the image will not appear before you. You must be absolutely certain in the force of your confidence, or in your rejection. Continue to pursue the course of logic. You see, Anastasia, all logic, too, tells me that man's knowledge in the area of folk medicine in the past was significantly greater than that possessed by people today. One might even say immeasurably greater. It follows that the services effected on the basis of this knowledge were significantly more perfected than today. But somehow it is challenging to suddenly find that all our modern hospitals, pharmacies, and medical institutions are completely superfluous. It simply boggles the mind. When someone in the Vedra civilization, our ancestor, came down with an ailment, he would eat an herb or drink a tea, and the ailment was gone. When someone in our civilization takes ill, he goes to the hospital, pays a fee to be seen by a doctor. The doctor prescribes some kind of pills or shots, and the patient has to pay again for the drugs, often quite dearly so. And then, in lots of cases, the drugs turn out to be counterfeit. Officials from the Ministry of Health say that up to 30% of the drugs sold at our pharmacies are counterfeit. And then, a whole bunch of terrible new diseases keep popping up. It's as though someone deliberately erased the perfect knowledge we once had and replaced it with something less efficient or even illusory. Moreover, official medicine still today treats folk healers with a fair degree of skepticism. Probably because it sees them as a competition. But why do not the state and society realize that for hundreds and thousands of years mankind has efficiently healed itself through folk medicine, accumulating a huge amount of experience over this time, and hence this deserves to be developed and studied, and, in the final analysis, to be taught in the schools? But that would mean all the businesses involved in modern medicine would collapse. Incredible. Simply incredible, Anastasia. I think I'm beginning to understand. Modern medicine is not as much about curing people as about running a business. And if it's business we're talking about, that means that all the companies making pills find it much more profitable when people are ill. The more sick people there are, the more income will kick in for the drug companies. By the laws of business, in such a situation, the number of sick people will quickly begin to steadily increase. It's a vicious circle. I'm becoming more and more convinced that healthcare in the distant past was much more rational and effective than today. Only there are a few historical facts that are standing in the way of a final conclusion. What kind of facts, Vladimir? Well, for instance, history has recorded epidemic outbreaks of plagues, smallpox, and leprosy. Some history textbooks say that whole settlements died out. Did that really happen? Yes, it did. But now, through the help of modern medicine, the plagues have been beaten, along with cholera and smallpox. For example, they inoculate everyone against smallpox, and that's the end of it. That means the folk healers of the past were defeated by these diseases, while modern medicine has succeeded. That is not true, Vladimir. Take a closer look at the time frames and put simple facts together. These epidemic outbreaks you speak of began happening at a time when folk healers were subjected to persecution. Many of them were even put to death. During the occult ages, they were seen as a threat to the authorities. Both then and now, it was believed that pagans worshipped nature and were unspiritual people. This is not true. Pagans respected nature as the creation of God, and they had knowledge of many of the divine creations which people are ignorant of today. That's enough, Anastasia. I no longer have any doubts. It is plain that modern medical science is a long ways from the science of folk medicine. I'm convinced of that. But why did you go to such pains to persuade me? It was not just for you. I wanted your readers, too, to be able to understand by comparing facts. But what for? When one fact is proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, other, indisputable conclusions will come about. They may seem incredible, but please do not be so easily amazed, Vladimir. What incredible conclusions, for example? First, answer this question. Tell me how people, the majority of people, explain how mankind in ancient times possessed such colossal information about nature. What do you mean, how? If you're talking about the prescriptions of folk medicine, it's quite clear they were passed down from generation to generation. All right, that may be, but I think you will agree that each of the thousands of prescriptions there had to be an original author. According to logic, of course, there had to be, but now it is no longer possible to trace the authorship of these prescriptions. It is possible. All the knowledge of the grand creation was imparted by the Creator to each and every one without exception. This I shall prove to you, Vladimir, and to everybody. Do not be too hasty to dismiss what I say as incredible. I shall try not to. Go on. People think that originally man was many times more feeble-minded than today, but that is not true, Vladimir. People of pristine origins had divine knowledge right from the beginning. But what do you mean from the beginning, Anastasia? What did God himself write out prescriptions for a whole bunch of herbal treatments? Historians' descriptions allude to mankind gradually accumulating its knowledge over the centuries. But to pursue the course of logic to its end, that particular allusion would lead to a different conclusion. What kind of conclusion? It would follow from that man is not the perfect creation of God, but the most underdeveloped of all creatures that ever lived on the earth. How does that follow? Think about it. Your dog knows what herbs she needs to eat when she comes down with an ailment, and a cat will know to run to the forest to find herbs she requires. But nobody wrote them a prescription. A bee knows all about extracting nectar from a flower, building a honeycomb and storing honey in it, and gathering pollen. And what raising the next generation is all about. If one link in the chain of knowledge the bee family is endowed with should be removed, the whole family would die out. But bees continue to exist today, and that can only mean one thing. The Creator has given them all the knowledge they need right from the start, right from the moment of their creation. And that is why the bees have not died out, but have lived for millions of years and are still building their unique honeycombs even today, just as in the first moment of their creation. And the ants, too, continue to build their homes, and flowers continue to unfold their petals with the advance of each new dawn, just as on the first day of their creation. And the apple, pear, and cherry trees know exactly what kind of juices they need from the ground to grow their fruit. All information is given to them right at their inception, right at the moment of their creation, and man is no exception. Yes, incredible. All logic really does lead to that conclusion. And that means, hold on. Just where is all this knowledge right now? It is preserved in every single man, and the therapeutic recipe for the healing herbal tea is one that every man is free to compile for himself. But how? You see, Vladimir, God gave it to man right from the beginning. It is capable of curing a great many diseases of the flesh and prolonging life. It is extremely simple, and at the same time, not so simple. Man should be able to figure it out with his mind. Let me start with some prehistory. In the Vedra civilization, everybody lived to be more than 100 years old, and they knew no disease of the flesh. They nourished themselves according to God's prescription, not arbitrarily and not haphazardly, but with the greatest thoughtfulness. The Creator specially arranged it so that the herbs, vegetables, berries, and fruits did not ripen all at once, but one after the other in a strict sequence. One ripened in the early spring, others over summer or late in the autumn. Their ripening time was determined by the moment when the specific fruit, vegetable, or herb could offer the greatest benefit to man. A man living on his own domain, feeding himself as God prescribed, could not take ill. The type of food and the time of taking it had been determined for man by God. Man himself decided the quantity of food, but not through reason. He ate as much as he liked, and his body could accurately determine down to the gram the required quantity of food. In the autumn, each family put up stores for winter: berries, root vegetables, herbs, nuts, and mushrooms. Over the winter, in every household, a plate stood on the table with little piles of produce from the summer harvest. All the members of the family were involved in their own activities, but whenever they felt hungry or thirsty, they would go over to the table and take what they needed without thinking about it. Note, Vladimir, they took what they needed without thinking. Their bodies knew exactly what kind of food was needed and in what quantity. Everyone had been endowed with this ability by God. This ability can be revived now. All that is needed is information. I have adapted the Vedras method of nutrition for people of today. Try it yourself and encourage others to try it. It goes as follows. A man living in a modern apartment needs to acquire a small quantity, 100 or 200 grams each, of all the vegetables, fruits, and edible herbs growing in the region where he lives. Before using any of this produce, he should go a whole day without eating, drinking only spring water, and having a glass of red beet juice for lunch. After drinking the beet juice, it is better not to leave his home. The stomach and bowels will start undergoing an intensive cleansing process. Upon awakening the following morning and feeling hungry, he should be able to take any vegetable, herb, or piece of fruit and put it on a small plate. After sitting down at the table, he should carefully observe what is lying on the plate, sniff it, lick it, and then eat it with an unhurried chewing. It is best to be alone in the room during this time, isolated from the sounds of the artificial world. The feeling of hunger may not disappear after eating a single piece of food, or it may reappear after a short period of time. In that case, he should select a second piece and eat it in the same manner as the first. Man should take all the produce he has obtained and sample them in any sequence at short intervals. The time for sampling any particular food is determined by the sensation of hunger. The taking of food should definitely begin in the morning. By the end of the day, a man should have sampled all the locally grown produce. If there is a large variety available and one day is insufficient, the sampling can extend to the following day. This procedure is extremely important. It will give many people's bodies, perhaps for the first time in their lives, a chance to become acquainted with the taste qualities and properties of the local produce, and to determine how needful it is to man at a given moment and in what quantity. Once the body has become familiar with all the produce, one should cut each vegetable into small pieces and lay them out on a large plate. Small clumps of greens and berries should also be put out, either alongside or on another plate. Any produce that will quickly spoil on the plate should be immersed in spring water. Also on the table, one should put honey, flower pollen, cedar oil, and spring water. Man may go about his own daily affairs, but when he feels hungry, he can go over to the table and pick up an item he likes, either with his hand or with a wooden spoon, and eat it. It is possible some of the food may be eaten up completely, while the rest may be left untouched. This means that your personal wise physician and nutritionist, your body, which was given to you by the Creator, selected for you what you needed at that moment. while what you did not need was left untouched. The uneaten produce need not be put again on the table the following day, but after 3 days a complete variety should once again be displayed. It is possible that one's body will need something different by then. In time, man will be able to determine which items can be temporarily excluded from his diet so as not to waste his efforts in obtaining them. But it is possible that after a period of time his body will indeed have a need for them again, and so from time to time one should lay out on the table as wide a variety as possible. I know that people living in your world often need to be far away from their dwellings, but even here one can adapt. For example, one can make or acquire a small birch bark container in which to put a portion of the food from the table. One's body will choose what is most required. In case of an extended trip, one's body needs to become familiar with the produce available in the new territory, since, in spite of identical names, there may be significant taste differences. In this method of nutrition, Vladimir, it is important to grasp one essential point. It is not only the animals that are able to determine which kinds of food will be most beneficial to their bodies at a given moment, and in what quantity. This knowledge is present, too, within every single man. Our son thought up everything correctly. To prepare the healing tea for you from the taiga herbs, he decided to observe a sable. But if you yourself knew the taste of every herb, your body would be able to determine and select the herbs you need far more accurately than the sable. When you get back to your apartment, allow your body to get to know the taste of all easily available produce. Do not mix the food together or add salt. Otherwise, your body will not be able to determine the value and significance of the produce. This method, by which any man can compile his own dietary regime or recipe for healthful nutrition, seemed to me to be the most original and logical. The body's needs, in terms of quantity and variety of produce, will naturally differ from one individual to the next. Consequently, there cannot be a single recipe or dietary regime which is the same for all. But through the aid of this method proposed by Anastasia, every man can make up his own individual regime, which will be as accurate and useful as possible for him. It appears as though man-made recipes and prescriptions are not always beneficial to one's health. Instead, they tend to be technology-based and more convenient for the manufacturers and organizers of our modern nutrition industry. Take McDonald's, for example, one of the most powerful and influential corporations known around the globe, inculcating in the whole world a taste for uniform hamburgers and cheeseburgers, along with packages of fried potatoes, roping in everybody under a single unitary norm. Such a system undoubtedly works very well to the manufacturer's advantage: uniform products, uniform equipment, and preparation technology. How far removed such uniformity is from the natural method of nutrition, and how harmful. More and more people all over the planet are becoming aware of this. Wednesday, the 16th of October 2002, the UN's World Food Day, became the annual official day of protest against McDonald's, a protest against the promotion of junk products under the guise of food, the use of aggressive child-oriented advertising campaigns, the cruel exploitation of workers, unethical treatment of animals, destruction of the environment, and the world dominance of large corporations over our lives. More and more, McDonald's is being held up by a worldwide circle of protesters as a symbol of contemporary capitalism. One after another, all across the globe, lawsuits are being brought against American corporations dealing junk food, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, and Wendy's, on behalf of millions of consumers led astray by the systematic and unethical promotion of harmful food products. These people have consequently suffered from obesity, heart ailments, and a variety of other serious problems. Concerns over this health threat is growing everywhere in Europe and the USA, exacerbated by mad cow disease and the use of genetically modified feed, as well as direct consumption of genetically modified produce, for example, potatoes and corn, and their traces in other products, chocolate, pastries, etc. But is it only our nutritional system that is constructed with somebody's particular profit motive in mind? What about our contemporary governmental institutions? Take, for example, our modern democratic society. How ideally suited it is to human life. I was most interested to hear what Anastasia would have to say about this. Tell me, Anastasia, if someone could construct a nutritional system for their own advantage at the expense of millions of people, I wonder whether our social order might have been deliberately set up with a similar motive. Indeed it has. Think about it, Vladimir. Ages pass, and the names of your societal structures change, but their raison d'etre remain the same, the exploitation of people. Well, it hasn't always been the same. For example, we used to have slavery, and now we have democracy. I think under democracy there is far less exploitation than when we had slavery. Vladimir, would you like me to show you a scene from the past and tell you a parable? I would. Then look and see.